诗was a poem written in the 1930s by Yuenren Chao. Chao was born in February of 1892 in the Qing dynasty off the northern coast of Tianjin. He moved to America in 1910 with a scholarship at Cornell University, where he graduated with a degree in math and physics. He equally earned a PhD in philosophy at Harvard in 1918. And lastly, he had a particular taste in learning new languages, knowing 7 languages in total, as well as many variations of Chinese dialects. This Chinese-American man went on to make many advancements in the Chinese linguistic field, pushing the boundaries of what was thought to be impossible. Some of his work includes his poetry, his Mandarin textbooks, his romanization system of the Guoyu Chinese dialect, and much more. Throughout his life, he taught Chinese across the US and near his hometown in Beijing. He died in 1982 in Massachusetts, leaving his legacy for the next generation to enjoy. As mentioned, the poem was written in the 1930s. Yuenren was living in China at the time of composition and release. This was at the beginning of the Chinese evolution and progression explosion. Despite his poem having a small impact on the Chinese front, it brought some curious attention to the Chinese culture. I think you get the idea. The poem itself translates to the lion-eating poet in the stone den. In a stone den was a poet called Shi, who was the lion-eating addict and had resolved to eat 10 lions. He often went to the market to look for lions. At 10 o'clock, 10 lions had just arrived at the market. At that time, Shi had just arrived at the market. He saw those 10 lions, and using his trusty arrows, caused the stone den was damp. So he asked his servants to wipe it. After wiping the stone den, he tried to eat those 10 lions. When he ate, he realized that those 10 lions were, in fact, 10 stone lion corpses. Try to explain this matter. Despite the text appearing quite simple when translated, you may come to question how such a text can be written using only one syllable. This is because in Mandarin, there are 4 tones for this specific sound. Shi. Each tone equally has its set of different homophones, allowing for this given intricacy. In this text, to really drive the point home, the author combines literary Chinese with modern script, as well as using certain loanwords between close Mandarin dialects to stretch for the over 100-word text, including the title. In English, we equally have word sets of the same genre. A good example is the buffalo phrase, where buffalo, 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 buffalo. Obviously, it isn't very clear at first listen, therefore I recommend you look into deeper dives on this subject. The poem narration is done by Yuan, making him the persona of the poem. As for the form, it is unclear whether it categorizes as open or closed form, or whether it even classifies as either. Yuenren's poem, as seen, has a unique linguistic structure and doesn't necessarily conform to typical patterns. Depending on the reader's viewing angle, it can be maximizing order, yet be equally unorderly at the same time. This being said, considering it is construction using only one syllable, it could be classified as closed form, though on the other hand it lacks structure amongst differentiating stanzas and phrase sizes. On the other hand, the same cannot be said about the rhyming scheme. The style of this given poem is hard to understand, and there is no category for anything of the sort. The rhyming scheme could be a sort of exaggerated varied antilipo. To compare, a regular antilipo is a text constructed with the use of one specific letter in every word. Obviously, in Chinese there are no letters, but if we can vary the definition of the antilipo structure, it could be the use of the same syllable in every word, where in this case the sh syllable is abundant. Overall, this exaggerated varied antilipo to an English speaker seems like it has a stressed rhyming scheme, yet to a Mandarin speaker it appears to have no structural rhyming with the different tones. As for the rhythm, the poem itself has a simple storytelling narration progression despite it sounding somewhat ridiculous. Unfortunately, when pushing the boundaries of a language, it becomes difficult to write a poem that has all the right components. This being mentioned, to analyze concepts, we can still bend the definitions of say concepts. Firstly, we could consider the Shi poem to be a sort of paradox where the concept of a human being the predator to the lion and not the opposite. In this situation, the opposite can make sense based on the text being able to have one syllable, but again, we are stretching the definition of what a paradox actually is. Secondly, the idea of imagery can be defined as arising the reader's senses with description, and while it can be easy when having access to all the sounds of the world, it becomes challenging when the only imagery structure possible is shi. Despite the text restrictions, it becomes remotely close to conveying imagery with the given extract. The stone den was damp. Digging deep into every word, we can get an idea of darkness, of humidity, of heat, of the cavernous sound and the uncomfortable smell. It's a stretch, yet it's what the author needed to settle for to be able to achieve his desired poetry structure. Lastly, alliteration and assonance are the most obvious of the poetry concepts that we can hear throughout the poem. We can obviously hear this with the abundance of sh as well as the various sounds throughout the poem. Socially, as said, the poem was all about pushing the boundaries of what was thought to be impossible. It was a cultural bridge that Yuenren Chao built to demonstrate the intricacy of the Chinese languages. Today, it is a well-known poem amongst all linguists of the world. When spread outside of China, romanization was required to be able to demonstrate the text's elaboration. Pinyin, the most common form of romanization, which is taking Chinese characters and writing them in the Latin alphabet, was a part of linguistics that fascinated Chao. He utilized this idea of Pinyinization of his text to demonstrate to China that even in the most abstract situation, Pinyin still works. It was a method he used to attempt at popularizing Pinyin in the mainland, which is today amongst the most widespread romanization systems in the world. According to Baidu, a Chinese internet source, Zhao Yuenren uses a situation that does not occur in actual spoken language to prove the possibility of Pinyinization of Chinese characters. Literarily, unfortunately, there's not much more to be said other than a poet named Shi that hunted 10 lions to eat in his stone den. It is quite a simple and low-level poem when translated to English, but as mentioned, having an internal literary masterpiece was not the initial goal. As for why I chose this poem over any other poem is because I have a specific taste for the more abstract sides of literature. I'm fond of learning linguistics, and I find Yuenren and I shared a lot of linguistic passions. We both love learning languages, and although I don't exploit them to their bare bits, we both enjoy filling in the cultural gaps in the world. As a final takeaway, next time you are in the want of an interesting poem, I sincerely recommend you consider searching for the more abstract styles of poetry that will forever be foreign into our society. This specific text can be considered a part of the roots of the Chinese cultural distinction outside of the mainland, and in my opinion, is one that is definitely worth appreciating.